Good evening to all our friends and supporters. I'm Meir Weinstein from Israel Now, and I'm joined with Mayor Jolovitz, Mideast analyst, expert. We're going to be discussing the next phase of the war against Iran, the Islamic regime of Iran. Mayor, I think you'd agree that their goals are just like Nazi Germany, to wipe out the Jews, wipe out Israel completely.
Very
And
much. Yeah.
the Jewish position should be, well, hopefully a unified position that this regime cannot last any longer. And over the period of 40 days, Israel has been engaged in striking Iran very significantly. The regime is weakened to a certain extent, but it still is operating, and it still has capabilities to fire into Israel. I was in touch today with some friends who live in Israel, and they were just telling me what they're going through, but for reasons that are very interesting. Israeli society is quite vibrant, and it's kind of like the routine. They run in to the bomb shelter when they get an alert, and then they get on with everything right after that. But Mayor, how do you see the next phase going on right now with Iran?
Interesting. During the past 2 weeks, even more so during the last couple of days, I've been asked, given my expertise in the area, what I think President Trump is going to do vis-a-vis this conflict in Iran. And I said it's a very difficult thing for me to answer because Donald Trump doesn't know what President Trump is going to do in the Middle East. And that's the reality. It's a very difficult thing to predict when he himself doesn't know. I sometimes offer some quotations to support some of the things that I say, and permit me to begin with a couple here, which will give some relevance to the concern that I have, and I think that you share as well. In the Art of the
Absolutely.
Deal, which you and I had mentioned briefly in the past, it was a book written in 1987, authored by Donald Trump. It was a real estate piece which they thought applied to all other conflicts that one can resolve. There were 11 principles or 11 tactics that were mentioned. Again, written in 1987, Donald Trump. And I just want to reference tactic number 5. Tactic number 5 is, and I'm quoting Donald Trump then, the worst thing you can possibly do in a deal is seem desperate to make it. That makes the other guy smell blood, and then you're dead. Close quote. Well, Donald Trump, I think the last time that I cited this was when you and I were discussing the Gaza 20-point peace plan that Trump had formulated. And I said that Hamas, sensing the fact that America was desperate for a deal, decided that it was going to hold back, taking advantage of the ceasefire. The same thing is happening now. Allow me 2 other things. Donald Trump on Truth Social, his social media outlet, on Tuesday, April 7th, so we're talking 5 days ago, came out and said the following, and I'm quoting, "A big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough. Likewise, so has everyone else." Let me just concentrate on those last 5 words. Likewise, so has everyone else. The moment that the Iranians see that the Americans are saying we've had enough, we agree, the Iranians completely changed their posture. It was a joke. They are taking advantage of the United States and its reluctance to be engaged in war. One other. When Trump was asked on that same day about Iran enriching uranium, this was last week, Trump responded. He was being interviewed by Reuters, and he said that he wasn't concerned about the prospect of an enrichment in the part of Iran. And I quote, he said, he was talking about the uranium. "That's so far underground, I don't care about that. We'll always be watching it by satellite." End quote. The Iranians read this, they see this, and they understand that there's a reluctance to complete this war on the part of the Americans. And all of a sudden, they've become completely emboldened. On March 6th, Trump came out and called for an unconditional surrender of Iran and said that he wouldn't settle for anything else. On March 25th, Trump comes out and offers a 15-point peace plan. And when we met last, I commented that it was surprising that the Iranians simply didn't say yes, 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 because it was basically telling the Iranians, listen, if you just say that you're going to go along with what we demand, we'll basically call off all sanctions and you guys can live a long and fruitful life. Just cooperate with us. Well, the Iranians once again detected that as a desperation, and they decided instead to reject everything that Trump, never mind that he was very beneficial to the Iranians, they decided that they were going to come out with what has since been described as a somewhat bogus promise of Iran's 10-point peace plan or 10-point plan. And the reason that it's viewed as bogus is because there were two translations which were actually offered. The one was in Farsi for the Iranians, and the other was in English. And the two weren't exactly alike. In the Farsi, in the Iranian version, it said that the United States agrees that they would allow Iran to continue with enrichment, and that Iran would, in fact, be allowed to do certain things which the American translation of the 10-point plan didn't. The embarrassment in Washington was somehow mitigated, I guess one would say, when they said, well, we never took this to be a very serious proposition. To which I come to this conclusion. The Iranians, and I had my radio show today and I mentioned this, the Iranians are quite skillful in playing the Americans. I mentioned, I was talking about Witkoff and Jared Kushner having joined J.D. Vance, and I said the Iranians are eating their lunch. It's absolutely absurd. And the reason I say that is because the Iranians understand, for whatever reasons, or a combination of reasons, the midterm elections most prominent that are hanging over Trump's head, that Trump is looking for an exit ramp. He's looking for some kind of out. He declared this war to be a victory. He, in fact, 5 times in the last 3 days, dared to say that we've accomplished a regime change. What a nonsensical comment to make. We've accomplished a regime change, and therefore we can come to some kind of solution. What was really upsetting is that Trump, and it was an opinion echoed by J.D. Vance and also by Steve Witkoff, who said that it doesn't appear that the Iranians are acting honorably. We expected them to be sincere in their negotiations. And one has to wonder what is going on in the meetings of the White House when all of a sudden they're saying that they're surprised that the Iranians aren't acting honorably. Last thing, there's never been, I mentioned this on the radio program as well that I did today, there's never been a single case, and when I say not a single case, I mean not a single case, where a ceasefire against an implacable Muslim enemy in the Middle East has ever been a positive thing to do. It has always backfired. Israel has learned that lesson, and the United States is fast learning that lesson, having come to terms several times with the ceasefire that they offered, for example, in June 24th of 2025, the first time that the United States and Israel collaboratively hit Iran. A ceasefire only works to benefit the other side, the bad guys.
Right.
Final comment is this. I've mentioned to a colleague of mine that the Iranians are brilliant in the way that they're manipulating the Americans. And his comment was, and I certainly agree with it because it's something which I've argued and spoken about for so long, he said, actually, I don't know that they're really brilliant. I think it's that the West is so stupid. To which I will say that both are right, both are correct. The Iranians are brilliant in being able, in their ability to manipulate the stupidity of the West. And when asked the question, what's going to happen? What's Trump going to do? my answer is exactly what I began this with. Trump doesn't know what Trump is going to do.
Yeah, he's made a lot of statements back and forth. There's no question about it. But it seems like our greatest concern is for Israel and the policy of Israel. It seems to me that the choice in Israel for a number of years, has been, and I'll use this Israeli political figure as a metaphor for representing the point of view of, for lack of better words, kicking the can down the road.
Mm-hmm.
The policy of Shimon Peres. Decorated politician, no question about it. Negotiator, no question about it. Smart person, absolutely. Charged by Ben Gurion to build Dimona. And, someone who is definitely not clueless or anything, but the policy of appeasement or kicking the can down the road, that's one choice that seems to have been the position for years. And we ended up with October 7th and other problems as well. We ended up with the you could even say probably the 73 war, where we knew what was going to happen and ignoring all the signs. Then you have the position, let's say, of Rabbi Meir Kahane, like a maximalist. It's our land. We know what the enemy's intentions are. Let's do it now before it spirals and becomes even worse. And that was addressed to the Arabs in Gaza, the Arabs in Judea and Samaria, certainly in Lebanon. Israel retreated from Lebanon years ago when they went in there. All these retreats only led to the strengthening of the enemy. And now we have Iran, that they made it clear for all these years they want to build a nuclear bomb. They consider Israel a one-bomb country, one bomb, and that's it. And all these anti-Israel mobs that are all over the world, and including Pakistan, that recently just called, the defense minister recently called for the destruction of Israel, and they're mediating these peace talks with the U.S. and Iran. So you see society in Israel, policy in Israel, swinging more to the position of Rabbi Kahane, which I would argue is actually a very reasonable, thought-out policy if one examines even when he gave his presentation at the National Press Club, and believe that if he had the capability, the forums, that your average American would see this as the most sensible program.
Okay. I take exception, at least by the manner which you phrased the credentials of Shimon Peres.
Mm-hmm.
Shimon Peres was not a good guy, other than his accomplishments in Dimona. You mentioned as a counterposition Rabbi Kahane, and I will say, just to begin with, Shimon Peres thought that Rabbi Kahane was a madman.
I know.
So we've got to pick and choose.
But we have October 7th. We have all kinds of disasters that have happened as a result of that policy of Perez type of people.
Well, right. I think you mentioned that he was not clueless about things. There was one thing that Shimon Peres was completely clueless about, completely. And that is that he didn't understand the Muslim mind. He didn't understand Islam. Shimon Peres was a disaster because he was the one who helped develop this whole conceptia, this concept where you can somehow assuage your enemy, and to go back to Rabbi Kahane's term, by offering them indoor plumbing.
Right, exactly.
Let me just mention, in the last 2 days, we saw something special happen. The whole world paid attention. On April 1st, NASA sent a space mission, April 1st, into outer space. It had 4 astronauts. It was a 9-day mission. It was going to circle. It did. It orbited around the moon, and it came back landing, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. 10 days later. It traveled at 24,661 miles per hour. These are specifics. These are the incredible accomplishments of the Western mind, of
Right.
science. And yet, mind you, they predicted it was going to splash down at 7:07 p.m. Central Time, and it splashed down at exactly that time, a prediction made 3 weeks before. And yet, that same Western mind is incapable of listening to an Arab broadcast, reading a speech, as you mentioned, Pakistan, in which they call for the destruction of the state of Israel. And yet they hear this, they see this, they watch October 7th, they see the rockets and the missiles that are flying into Israel, and they can't understand that this is an implacable enemy. So on the one hand, you've got the brilliance of the Western mind, able to predict 2 or 3 weeks in advance the very
Mhm.
minute that the mission was going to land, and yet
Amazing.
they don't
Yep.
seem to understand what the Arab intention is, or the Muslim, because we're talking about
Mhm.
Iran, what the Muslim intention is vis-a-vis the Western world. This is a conflict that one cannot reconcile. They cannot reconcile. I've given speeches in which I talk about the brilliance of the West. I talk about, in fact, I had printed a couple of these things, whatever, that 2 years ago, science actually came out and told us how many ants actually inhabit the planet. They talked about 22 quadrillion planets. They talked about the fact that they actually landed something in order to try and deflect an asteroid. They had to predict to the exact mile per hour where it was going to be. They could actually strike an asteroid. Science can do all this, and yet the experts on Middle East affairs can't turn on the radio, can't watch television, can't listen to the speeches of the Muslims and understand what the Muslim intention is vis-a-vis the West. There is something terribly wrong. It's a pathological psychosis on the part of our decision makers, our so-called experts, in which they refuse to accept the narrative because it isn't the narrative that they want to accept. Last word. All these people, including Donald Trump at times, too often, but they live in a world that ought to be. They don't live in a world that is. And they need to wake up. This isn't about optimism, and it's not about pessimism. It's about realism. And there aren't enough people who are decision makers who live in the real world. And it's tragic, truly tragic.
100%. Okay, well, we're running out of time. So, Mayor, let's wrap it up. Final words on how do you see this? What would be
Yeah.
your prediction for tomorrow, even?
Yeah, well, J.D. Vance and Jared Kushner and Witkoff and even Trump and everything else, they've been played as fools. I mentioned, not the first time, I think I've done it in a broadcast or perhaps even 2 with you, and it's a quotation and that I need to pull. When I did on the radio, a very intelligent colleague of mine, a good friend, said to me, "Don't mention that man. He's a terrible, terrible man when he came to Israel." And he was right. He was talking about Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was a bad guy. But Henry Kissinger did have one quotation, which I cite time and again, because it's relevant to understanding the Middle East. And that is, he said, a murderer can also be a liar. And that's something that the Western world, we know that these people killed anywhere between 42,000 and perhaps 85 or 86,000 of their own citizens. We know that they're murderers. But all of a sudden, J.D. Vance comes back from Islamabad and he's in shock that they aren't being honorable. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to
Absolutely.
be kidding me. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. It's
Okay.
unbelievable. And there's supposed to be talks going on, I think, starting on Tuesday with the government of Lebanon and Israel through their ambassadors. We'll see exactly where that goes, but obviously that government is not capable of disarming Hezbollah.
And they don't want to.
So,
Yeah, they're kicking, as you said, they're kicking the can down the road, and Israel is participating. As long as Israel today, There was no attack on Iran today by the United States or by Israel. None. That is a victory for the Muslims are concerned about one thing: survival.
Right.
And every time that you and I talk that the war isn't over with an unconditional surrender, to go back to the comment that was made by Trump on March 6th, for them, they've prevailed. They've won. They've won because they've not been destroyed.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Right.
and gather all over again.
Okay, we'll take this up again probably later this week. Mayor, thank you, and may God bless Israel and the IDF. Thank you.
Take care.